There was just one decisive game in round 4 of the Sinquefield Cup. Let's take a look at it. Wesley So with the white pieces playing against Aronian. Wesley So played a very ambitious line against the Nimzo Indian here. He played f3. Of course, this has been seen for many decades, and this is very popular in the 1950s with a lot of Russian players actually. And the idea is that white is attempting to build a huge centre with e4, but it is quite time consuming, and one could, well, as there was a famous Soviet chess player called Eddie Gufeld, who always used to say when the pawn came to f3 in the opening, he was talking about the Zaimish variation against the King's Indian. He used to say, "What does knight g1 think about pawn f3?" In other words, f3 is the natural square for the knight. But okay, let's see what happens in the game. c5. There are many ways to play this, but you can play d5 as well. But c5 is also a very interesting move. So we get a kind of Benoni position, except black is actually ahead in development here. And instead of putting the knight to f3, the knight has to go via e2, usually round to g3. But it's time consuming, and you can see that black has already castled, white's king is still in the middle of the board. In this position, b5 has actually been played quite a few times, just to blast open the centre, attack white's centre, pawn sacrifice. So black weakens the pawn on d5, and now trades on d5. And well, it's not such a bad idea, not bad to play like this. Aronian played a6, so he also wants to play b5. Wesley stopped this with a4. Obviously, if b5, you can recapture with the a pawn, and there's a pin on the a file. And now one could play like this, and then rook b8. But Aronian plays something a bit quicker. He played bishop a5, a rather unusual move actually. So not bothering with development, but with bishop a5 he's blocking the a file, and so wants to get in b5 again. So for example, if knight g3, the normal developing move, then b5 is quite a nice pawn sacrifice. For example, if white takes, we exchange on d5 and just play knight d7, and you can see that with that pawn on f3, it means there are certain weaknesses on the e file. Rook e8 is coming, and that pawn on d5 is quite weak as well. Perhaps bishop b7, maybe knight b6. Wesley preferred to stop that with bishop d2. Aronian exchanged and now played knight to h5. Okay, this is a really ambitious move from Aronian. He's opening up the diagonal for the queen to come to h4. He's also preparing in some positions to play f5, and this breaks open white's centre. It just chips away at this centre. This pawn chain looks very, very impressive, but in fact it's quite brittle, it's quite inflexible. If white can maintain it, then he'll be set for the middle game, or an end game. This could be fantastic, but before then black has a big chance to attack it, and that's what happened here. If knight g3, then queen h4 is very nice for black. Therefore Wesley played g3, preparing to bring the bishop to g2. But this is very time consuming, and really I think the bishop should belong in this diagonal actually. Anyway, g3, I think in this position is sort of probably the best move. Now one could play f5 straight away. I don't think this is a bad move. But knight d7 was played, also interesting, and after bishop g2, Aronian got in his move b5. If this is exchanged off, then we take on d2. Obviously queen d2 isn't good because the rook on a1 is hanging. You've got to play king d2, and well, that's already very nice compensation for black. Castles isn't too bad for white here. Now, this does allow black's queenside pawns to roll down the board. But actually after, let's say, bishop e3, I don't think this is too bad for white. This knight should at some point come to d2. Perhaps there's a chance later on to play knight d4. Okay, black also has some nice moves, you know, maybe bishop b6 and followed by knight c5. Very double-edged position. Instead of that, Wesley played g4. Well, that is super ambitious. If the knight goes back, obviously white gains time and has beaten back black's pieces. But Aronian didn't back down. First of all, he played b4. This is a nice move. If pawn takes knight on h5, then black takes the piece back, gives a check. Knight e5. Okay, white can castle here, but somehow his pawns look very ragged here. Perhaps black would play something like rook b8. There are sort of weak squares here. I mean, certainly this is fantastic compensation for black. You know, it could be that f5 comes in fairly quickly as well, and somehow white's kingside, although there are a lot of pieces there, it looks a bit ragged. Instead, Wesley played the knight back to b1, then there came a check. I mean, I think that might have been sort of the last decent chance for white, actually. So now the king is stuck in the middle, more or less. It means if you can't castle, then those rooks, white's rooks, are split, and that is dangerous, very dangerous. And here, Aronian seized his chance. Knight e5, it's a really nice piece sacrifice. If pawn takes knight, he just wants to play f5, crack open the f file, and white's king is rather unfortunately placed opposite the rook on the f file. Wesley played bishop e1 here. After half an hour's thought, over half an hour, he realised he was in big trouble. So that pushes the queen back, and then he took the knight. But now comes knight f3. Okay, that was blocked. I think this is an interesting moment, actually. Aronian could have grabbed some material back, but he would lose something of his initiative in this case. Instead, fairly quickly, he played bishop g4. I love the spirit in which Aronian played this game. You know, he didn't grab back material at the first chance. He realises that with white's pieces on the back rank, he just has fantastic compensation with the piece. In particular, I mean, look at those rooks. I've already pointed this out, but it's even more emphasised in this position. So basically, white is playing without his rooks here, whereas all black's pieces are in play. Black's rooks can easily join the fray. All other pieces in play. This is fantastic compensation for black. Queen c1 played. Now knight d4. Now the point of this is to crack open the c file, and then the rook is going to join the party. e5 played. Takes, and then knight d2. So Wesley trying to develop. Rook c8. Okay, the rook comes into play. Now this is a very nice move from Aronian. I mean, there are several ways to play this position, but b3 is really nice. Basic threat is to play, well, rook c2, but also, of course, bishop takes knight. And if this knight comes to e4, then just queen f4. Then rook c2 would be coming. But this is a distraction move. Of course, that pawn can be taken, hitting the bishop. But now that knight is just a little bit offside on b3, and this makes it much easier for Aronian to make the final attack. Okay, Wesley pushes the bishop back, it makes no difference to the position. King g1, well, it's desperate stuff from white. Look at that rook on h1, horrible. Bishop f5. So one idea is he wants to bring that rook to c2, of course, afterwards. Or if queen f1, actually e4 is really, really strong. Those pawns just rolling down the board, and white is just helpless there. Bishop e4 played, queen g5 check, king nudges away, and again, just very calm from Aronian here. A little step with the queen. Okay, this is, bishop is taken, but now d3. And threat of mate. And rook c2, it's all over. Wonderful game from Aronian. Just, he plays with such a free hand and just shows very little consideration for material concerns. It's all about the activity of black's pieces. Beautiful stuff. As I said, that was the only decisive game in round 4. So that means that after 4 rounds, there are now 2 leaders in the tournament. Both Vasyl Topalov and Levon Aronian both have 3 out of 4.